The flash of a camera is a brutal, unforgiving thing. For Kimberly Shaw, it was the sound of her world breaking. One moment, she was the city's darling, standing in the opulent glow of the Grand Athenaeum's Winterlight Gala, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her 6-month pregnancy. The next, she was invisible. Because 50 feet away, illuminated by that same cruel flash of light, her husband, the self-made tech titan Grayson Shaw, was wrapping his arms around another woman. And this wasn't just any hug. It was an embrace of ownership, of intimacy, of secrets now blasted into the public eye. He was a billionaire, hugging his mistress in public, and his pregnant wife was standing right behind him. The air in their penthouse overlooking Central Park was always still, a carefully curated silence that cost a fortune to maintain. It was a silence Kimberly once found peaceful. Now it felt like a vacuum sucking the very breath from her lungs. For the past 2 months, Grayson had been a ghost in their home, a phantom who smelled of a perfume that wasn't hers, and spoke of late-night server crashes and emergency board meetings, with a fluency that bordered on rehearsed. Kimberly wasn't a fool. She was an architect, a woman who understood structure foundations and the telltale signs of stress fractures. Their marriage, once a towering skyscraper of mutual ambition and genuine affection, was showing cracks. He'd stopped touching the gentle curve of her stomach, his nightly ritual of whispering goodnight to their unborn son, replaced by the clicking of a phone being hastily silenced. His eyes, once warm pools of deep brown, that held her as if she were the only person in the universe, now skated over her, seeing not a wife and expectant mother, but an obstacle. She had built her life around him. After her own firm, Connolly & Associates, had achieved significant acclaim for its sustainable urban designs, she had agreed to step back to merge her smaller boutique company with a subsidiary of Shaw Ventures. Grayson had called it a synergy of power couples, a way for them to build an empire together. She had called it love. She had poured her energy into designing their dream home, and more recently, the nursery, a serene space of soft greys and blues filled with the quiet promise of a new life. This gala, the annual Winterlight Gala, was supposed to be their triumphant return to the social scene. After months of her quiet semi-seclusion due to a difficult first trimester, Grayson had insisted, "We need to show them we're stronger than ever, Kimberly." He had set his hands on her shoulders, his gaze just missing hers. "You, me, and our little guy. The future of the Shaw dynasty." Tau, she had chosen her gown with meticulous care, a deep emerald velvet, custom-made by Oscar de la Renta, that flowed over her bump with understated elegance. She wore the Connolly diamonds, a family heirloom passed down from her grandmother, a cascading waterfall of ice against her skin. As she stood before the mirror, she saw a woman who looked the part, the powerful, beloved wife of Grayson Shaw. But beneath the velvet and diamonds, a cold dread had been coiling in her stomach all evening. The Grand Athenaeum was a sea of glittering socialites, predatory journalists, and calculating business rivals. The air crackled with forced laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes. Grayson was in his element, a king surveying his court. He navigated the room with a predator's grace, his hand possessively on the small of her back. He would smile for the cameras, murmur a possessive, "My beautiful wife," for the society columnists, and then his eyes would start to scan the crowd, searching. Kimberly knew he was looking for someone. The nervous energy humming off him was palpable. A tick in his jaw, a subtle tightening of his grip on her. She followed his gaze, trying to pinpoint the source of his distraction, but was constantly interrupted by well-wishers wanting to touch her belly to offer saccharine congratulations on her glow. "You must be so thrilled, Kimberly," purred Beatrice Vance, a woman whose face was pulled so tight it looked like a porcelain mask. "To have it all, the husband, the home, the baby, a true fairy tale." Kimberly managed a tight smile. "We're very blessed, Beatrice." But as Beatrice drifted away, Kimberly's eyes found Grayson again. He had detached from a conversation with a senator and was moving towards the impressionist wing. His pace was hurried, his shoulders tense. And then she saw her. The woman was a stark contrast to the old money elegance of the room. She was sharp modern, dressed in a severe blood-red gown that clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was a severe black bob, her lips painted the same shade as her dress. She commanded attention, not with softness, but with an unapologetic, sharp-edged ambition. Kimberly recognized her from a company newsletter. Zoe Novak, the new brilliant head of acquisitions at Shaw Ventures, poached from a rival firm in a move that had been lauded in the business pages. Zoe's eyes were locked on Grayson, a triumphant, possessive gleam in them that sent a shard of ice through Kimberly's heart. This was it. This was the source of the strange perfume, the late nights, the hollow space in their bed. It wasn't a server crash. It was her. Kimberly felt a strange sense of disassociation, as if she were watching a film of her own life. She should move. She should leave, scream, do something. But her feet felt like lead rooted to the plush carpet. She watched a silent, unseen spectator to her own betrayal as Grayson reached Zoe. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look around to see who was watching. The embrace was not a friendly greeting. His hand slid down Zoe's back, pulling her flush against him. Zoe's arms wrapped around his neck, her manicured fingers tangling in his hair. He buried his face in her neck, and even from 50 feet away, Kimberly could see the tension leave his body replaced by a raw, unguarded relief. It was the kind of relief he used to find only with her. And then it happened. The pop and flash of a single camera from a freelance photographer lurking near the archives. The light was a merciless spotlight, freezing the moment in time, the billionaire and his mistress locked in an embrace that spoke of 1,000 stolen nights and broken promises. The light caught something else too. As Grayson pulled back slightly, his hand went to Zoe's neck. He fastened a necklace there, a delicate platinum chain from which hung a single flawless canary diamond. It was audacious. It was a statement. It was a slap in the face. The world went silent. The murmur of the crowd, the distant music, it all faded into a dull roar in Kimberly's ears. All she could hear was the frantic, panicked thumping of her own heart and the tiny fluttering kicks of the baby inside her, a baby who would be born into the wreckage of this single catastrophic moment. She brought a hand to her stomach, a reflexive gesture of protection. The photographer, seeing her, swung his camera around. Another flash. This one captured her, the wife, the mother-to-be, standing alone in the shadows, watching her perfect life burn to the ground. The journey home was a descent into a new kind of hell. The heated leather seats of the Rolls-Royce Phantom, usually a symbol of comfort and success, felt like a coffin. The silence between them was thick and suffocating, broken only by the quiet hum of the engine as their driver, Robert, navigated the glittering, indifferent streets of Manhattan. Robert's eyes, visible in the rear-view mirror, were fixed firmly on the road, a mask of professional stoicism that couldn't quite hide the pity Kimberly saw in their depths. Even the help knew. The humiliation was absolute. Grayson didn't speak. He stared out the window, the muscles in his jaw working furiously. He wasn't remorseful. He was angry. Angry he'd been caught. Kimberly watched his reflection in the tinted glass, the face of the man she had loved now twisted into the unfamiliar lines of a stranger. The love she had felt for him just hours ago had curdled into something cold and heavy in her chest, a toxic mix of grief and a burgeoning, terrifying rage. When they finally swept into the private garage beneath their building, Grayson was out of the car before it had even come to a complete stop. He didn't wait for her, didn't offer a hand. He strode towards the private elevator, a man desperate to escape the consequences of his own actions. Kimberly moved slowly, deliberately. Each step was a conscious effort to keep from crumbling. The Connolly diamonds felt like a lead weight on her neck. The elevator ride up to the penthouse was 45 seconds of suspended agony. He stood in one corner, she in the other. He finally broke the silence, his voice a low, rough growl. It wasn't what it looked like, Kim. Kimberly turned her head slowly to look at him. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. It was so insulting, so dismissive of her intelligence that it almost made her laugh. A raw, hysterical sound caught in her throat. Wasn't what it looked like, she repeated, her voice eerily calm. You mean I didn't see you embrace your employee as if you were drowning, and she was the last piece of driftwood on earth? I didn't see you fasten a diamond around her neck in the middle of the most public event of the year. Please, Grayson, do enlighten me. What was it I saw? The elevator doors opened into their private foyer. He swept past her into the grand living room, the floor-to-ceiling windows displaying a panoramic view of the city that now felt like a taunt. He finally turned to face her, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his signature move when he was trying to regain control. Zoe has been under a lot of pressure. He began his voice, taking on the placating tone he used with difficult board members. The Sterling acquisition is a monster of a deal. She closed it. That necklace? It was a bonus, a corporate gift. The hug was congratulatory. It was a moment of professional relief. The photographer twisted it into something sordid. Kimberly walked towards the bar, her movements measured. She didn't want a drink. She wanted a weapon. She wanted to hurl one of the heavy crystal decanters through the window and watch the glittering city fracture along with her life. Instead, she rested her hands on the cool marble, gripping it until her knuckles turned white. A corporate gift. Grayson, you gave her a Leviev yellow diamond. I know because you showed it to me last month and said you were considering it for my push present. The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Did you forget who you told? Or do you just lie so often you can't keep track anymore? His face paled. He had been caught in a lie so specific, so careless that there was no way to spin it. The mask of control slipped, revealing the cornered animal beneath. It's not. It's complicated, he stammered. No, it's not, she said, turning to face him fully, her eyes blazing with a cold fire he had never seen before. It's brutally simple. You are sleeping with Zoe Novak. You have been for months. You have been lying to me every single day while I carry your son. You disrespected me, our marriage, and our child in the most public way imaginable, because you are arrogant enough to believe there are no consequences for your actions. See simple. He stared at her, momentarily speechless. He had expected tears, screaming a dramatic scene he could manage and control. He had not expected this icy, precise dissection of his pathetic betrayal. He tried a different tactic vulnerability. Kim, I've been lost, he said, taking a step towards her. The pressure of the business, the baby. It's a lot. I made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But it's you I love. It has always been you. She means nothing. The words were textbook. They were the hollow script of every cheating husband in history. And they meant nothing. For Kimberly, the love wasn't just gone. It had been annihilated. In its place, something new was taking root. a cold, hard resolve. "Stop talking," she said, her voice dangerously low. "Don't you dare say you love me. You don't get to use that word as a shield for your weakness. You don't get to use our son as an excuse for your betrayal." She walked past him, heading towards the master suite. "I want you to leave," she said, without looking back. "What, Kim, don't be ridiculous. This is my home." She stopped at the door and turned a mirthless smile touching her lips. "This is our home, which you have desecrated, and right now I can't stand to breathe the same air as you. Go to a hotel. Go to her. Frankly, I don't care. Just get out." "We need to talk about this," he pleaded, a note of panic in his voice. "We can fix this." "There is no we to fix." Kimberly stated each word a final, damning verdict. "You burned that bridge tonight. Now get out of my house." She walked into their bedroom and closed the door, the soft click of the latch echoing in the cavernous apartment like a gunshot. She didn't lock it. That would have been an act of fear. This was an act of command. She leaned against the cool wood of the door, her body finally starting to tremble. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to drain away, leaving behind a deep, seismic pain. She slid down the door to the floor, wrapping her arms around her stomach, around her son. The tears came then hot and silent. They weren't tears of a victim. They were tears of grief for the man she thought she had married for the future that had been stolen from her. And as she wept in the darkness of her gilded cage, a new steely resolve began to form in the ruins of her heart. Grayson thought this was a mistake he could manage. He had no idea he hadn't just broken his marriage. He had declared war on the wrong woman. The first light of dawn spilled over the city, casting long shadows across the pristine, white marble floors of the penthouse. Kimberly had not slept. She had sat in the dark, watching the city lights blink out one by one, feeling the last vestiges of the woman she used to be slip away. The grief was still there, a raw, open wound. But beneath it, the foundations of her new reality were setting like concrete. She was no longer just an architect of buildings. She would now be the architect of Grayson's downfall. She showered and dressed not in soft loungewear, but in a tailored black dress, her armor, as she used to call it when facing a tough client. She pulled her hair back into a severe chignon. Looking in the mirror, she saw the faint smudges of exhaustion under her eyes, but in their depths was a glint of steel. Her first call was not to her mother or her best friend. It was to her older brother, Leo Connolly. Leo was the antithesis of Grayson. Quiet, methodical, and fiercely protective, he ran the financial arm of what was left of their family's old money legacy. He was the anchor in her life. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Kim, it's 6 a.m. Is the baby okay?" "The baby is fine," she said, her voice steady. "But my marriage is over." There was a pause, then the sound of him sitting up, instantly alert. "What happened? I saw the gala photos are already all over, page 6. "It's exactly what it looks like, Leo," she said, skipping the painful details. He could read about them like everyone else. "I need help. Not emotional support, not yet. I need a professional. I need the best divorce attorney in New York. Someone who isn't afraid to go up against Grayson Shaw. Someone who plays to win, no matter how dirty it gets." Leo didn't waste time with condolences. He understood the shift in her tone. This was business. "I know a man. Benjamin Carter. They call him the Shark, for a reason. He's ruthless discreet, and he despises new money tech bros like Grayson. I'll have his office clear his schedule. He'll meet you whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now," Kimberly said. "Book it for 10 a.m. Her second call was to a number she had saved years ago, a relic from a past security concern. It was to a private investigation firm, run by an ex-Mossad agent named Ronan. He specialized in corporate and marital espionage, with a reputation for unearthing secrets people would kill to keep buried. "Ronan, it's Kimberly Shaw," she said when he answered. "Mrs. Shaw. It has been a long time. I trust you are well." His voice was gravelly, with a hint of an Israeli accent. "I have a job for you," she said, cutting to the chase. "I want everything you can find on Zoe Novak. Everything. Education, past employment, financials, social circles, ex-lovers, any skeletons in her closet, no matter how small. I also want a full workup on my husband, Grayson Shaw. I want to know every deal he's made in the last 6 months, every meeting, every dinner, every discrepancy in Shaw Ventures books. I want to know where the money is going, all of it. The budget is unlimited." "Understood," Ronan said, a hint of professional appreciation in his voice. "We will be invisible. You will have your first report within 48 hours." Her final act of the morning was to walk into Grayson's home office. The room was a monument to his ego, all dark wood, polished chrome, and cutting-edge technology. His password was predictably their anniversary date. It was a pathetic, sentimental choice for a man so calculating. A rookie mistake. She logged in. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she was a hunter now. She bypassed his personal emails, knowing they would be a minefield of painful details she didn't have the strength for yet. Instead, she went for the financial folders, the corporate accounts. She began to copy files, terabytes of data, onto a series of encrypted hard drives she had purchased for a past architectural project. Shaw Ventures quarterly reports, internal audits, offshore account statements and files labeled with cryptic project names like Project Nightingale and Phoenix Initiative. She didn't understand all of it, but Ben Carter and his forensic accountants would. Just as she was finishing, her phone buzzed. It was Grayson. Then again, and again. A string of texts followed. "Kim, please pick up. We need to talk. I'm so sorry. I can fix this. I'll fire her today. Don't do anything rash. Think about the baby." The last text made her blood run cold. He was using their child as a bargaining chip, a shield. She typed a single cold response. "All communication will now go through my attorney. You will be hearing from him shortly." She blocked his number. At 9:45 a.m., she walked out of the penthouse carrying a sleek leather briefcase containing the hard drives. She didn't look back. As she rode the elevator down, she felt a profound shift. The penthouse was no longer her home. It was a crime scene. Grayson was no longer her husband. He was her opponent. Benjamin Carter's office was in a discreet midtown skyscraper, a world of muted colors, expensive art, and hushed confidence. Carter himself was in his late 50s with piercing blue eyes and a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt aggression. He didn't offer platitudes. He listened, his gaze unwavering, as Kimberly laid out the facts of the gala with cold architectural precision. She concluded her summary and pushed one of the hard drives across the polished mahogany desk. "That is a copy of my husband's private server. I want a full forensic accounting. He's been careless lately, arrogant. I believe you will find things that are of interest." A slow smile spread across Carter's face. It was the smile of a shark scenting blood in the water. "Mrs. Shaw," he said, his voice a purr of professional delight. "Most wives come in here with tears and tissues. You've come in with a battle plan and ammunition. I have a feeling you and I are going to work together very, very well." "I don't want to just divorce him, Mr. Carter," Kimberly said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with the intensity of her newfound purpose. "I don't just want half of his assets. I want to understand why. And then I want to dismantle the empire he built on my trust. I want him to know what it feels like to have the foundations of his world turned to dust." Carter leaned back in his chair, the smile widening. "Kimberly," he said, dropping the formality. "Call me Ben. And I can assure you, by the time we are done, Grayson Shaw will wish he had only broken your heart." The first report from Ronan arrived 72 hours later, not as an email, but as a sealed black envelope delivered by a courier with no return address. Kimberly sat at the kitchen island of her brother Leo's townhouse, her new temporary sanctuary, and read its contents. The information on Zoe Novak was both banal and illuminating. Zoe was the picture of relentless ambition. Born to a working-class family in Ohio, she had clawed her way into a scholarship at Wharton, then through a series of increasingly prestigious firms on Wall Street. Her reputation was that of a brilliant but ruthless deal-maker who left a trail of burned bridges and resentful colleagues in her wake. There were whispers of her using intimate relationships with superiors to gain advantages, but nothing ever proven, nothing that ever stuck. She was smart. Ronan had also uncovered her financials. For a woman on a generous but not astronomical salary, she lived extravagantly. A loft in Soho that should have been far beyond her means, a wardrobe of designer clothes, a standing reservation at the most exclusive restaurants. The money was coming from somewhere. Ronan's preliminary analysis traced it to a series of wire transfers from a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. The name of the corporation was Nightingale Holdings. Kimberly's blood ran cold. Project Nightingale was one of the folders she had copied from Grayson's server. She immediately called Ben Carter. "Ben, I have something. A shell corporation. Nightingale Holdings." She could hear the furious clicking of keys on his end. "Got it," he said after a moment. "It's one of his. Registered 18 months ago. It's been funding Zoe Novak's lifestyle to the tune of about $2 million over the last year. He didn't just give her a job, Kimberly. He set her up. He bought and paid for her entire life." The calculation of it was staggering. This wasn't a whirlwind affair, a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a long-term, premeditated campaign of deceit. Grayson had been building a separate life with this woman, funding it with their money, all while Kimberly was at home, planning their future, planning their family. "There's more," Ben said, his voice tight with excitement. "My forensic team has been tearing through the data you brought me. Nightingale Holdings isn't just a slush fund for his mistress. It's an active investment vehicle, and its primary target is a company called Connolly Renewables." Kimberly felt the air leave her lungs. Connolly Renewables was the modern iteration of the company her great-grandfather had founded, a pioneering engineering firm that had been the cornerstone of her family's wealth and reputation for generations. Her father had been forced to sell a majority stake during a market downturn a decade ago, a decision that had broken his heart. The company had since been mismanaged into near bankruptcy by a corporate raider. "What about it?" Kimberly asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Grayson is using Nightingale Holdings to secretly buy up its debt," Ben explained. "He's been acquiring it for pennies on the dollar. Once he controls the debt, he'll control the company. He's staging a hostile takeover, Kimberly, from the shadows." The pieces began to click into place with sickening clarity. Grayson knew how much that company meant to her family's legacy. She remembered conversations late at night where she'd lamented its decline, fantasized about one day buying it back and restoring it to its former glory. Was this his plan, to betray her, then present her, with her family's company, on a silver platter as a grand redemptive gesture, a way to wash away his sins with an extravagant manipulative gift? The sheer godlike arrogance of it was infuriating. He was playing with her family's history, with her deepest desires, as if it were all a game he could control. But Ronan's report contained another more disturbing detail. Zoe Novak, before joining Shaw Ventures, had worked for the very private equity firm that had mismanaged Connolly Renewables into the ground. She knew its finances, its weaknesses, its vulnerabilities inside and out. She wasn't just a mistress. She was a strategic asset. Grayson hadn't hired her for her ambition. He'd hired her for her inside knowledge. The betrayal deepened, branching out from the personal to the professional, infecting every part of her life. Her marriage, her career, her family's legacy. It was all entangled in his web of lies. That evening, Leo found her staring out the window, a storm raging outside that mirrored the tempest in her soul. "What is it, Kim?" he asked gently. "He's trying to buy the old Connolly company," she said, her voice flat. "He's using Zoe's inside knowledge to do it. He was going to give it to me as a gift, I think. A trophy to make up for his affair." Leo was silent for a long moment, processing the layers of manipulation. "The man's ego is a marvel of engineering," he finally said, his voice laced with disgust. "What are you going to do?" Kimberly turned from the window, her eyes clear and resolute. "A grand gesture deserves a grand response. Don't you think he wants to play God with my family's legacy? He thinks he's the king moving all the pieces on the board. He's forgotten one thing." "What's that?" "I'm a Connolly," she said, a flicker of a predatory smile on her lips. "And this is my family's board. He's about to find out what it feels like to be a pawn in someone else's game." The plan began to form in her mind, intricate and precise, like one of her own architectural blueprints. Grayson had underestimated her. He saw her as a wife, a mother-to-be, an emotional creature he could manage. He had forgotten she was the woman who had built her own celebrated firm from the ground up. He had forgotten she had a mind that saw all the angles, a mind that knew how to build, and a mind that knew how to demolish. She picked up her phone and dialed Ben Carter. "Ben," she said, her voice humming with a newfound power, "I need you to find out who the other major debt holders are for Connolly Renewables, and I need a meeting with the board of Shaw Ventures, not as Grayson's wife, as a shareholder. It's time to talk about fiduciary duty and conflicts of interest." The war had begun. The days that followed were a blur of encrypted emails, hushed phone calls, and clandestine meetings in sterile law offices. Kimberly, with Leo and Ben Carter's team, worked with a singular, ferocious focus. They were no longer just reacting to Grayson's betrayal. They were building a fortress and sharpening their spears. Ben's team confirmed her horrifying suspicion. Grayson's plan was even more insidious than she had imagined. He called it the Phoenix Initiative. The idea was to acquire Connolly Renewables through the Shell Corporation, absorb its valuable patents into Shaw Ventures, and then let the original company, the Connolly name, die, taking its pension obligations and other liabilities with it. Then, after the birth of their son, he would launch a new Connolly Shaw Green Energy subsidiary, presenting it to Kimberly as a joint legacy for their child. He wasn't saving her family's company. He was gutting it for parts and using its hollowed-out corpse as a PR stunt to mask his infidelity. But the most damning discovery came from a deep dive into the financial structure of the takeover. To fund the massive debt acquisition, Grayson hadn't just used his own capital. He had, through a series of complex and legally dubious maneuvers, leveraged assets from a trust fund. It was a trust Kimberly's grandfather had established for his future great-grandchildren. It was the money she had earmarked for her son's future. He was gambling with their child's inheritance to fund a scheme with his mistress. The rage that filled Kimberly was so pure, so absolute, it burned away any remaining vestiges of sorrow. This was no longer about a broken heart. This was about the violation of a sacred trust, an attack on the future of her unborn child. "He's crossed a line," she told Leo, her voice trembling with fury. "This isn't just immoral, it's illegal. This is grounds for his removal from the company, from any company." "The Shore Ventures board is loyal to him, Kim," Leo warned. "They're a boys' club of his own making. They won't oust their golden goose over a messy divorce and some creative accounting." "They will if the alternative is having the SEC and the Southern District of New York crawling all over their books," Kimberly countered. "And they will if their largest minority shareholder presents them with a viable alternative." That was the crux of her plan. Through her marriage and her own savvy pre-Grayson investments, Kimberly controlled a not insignificant 8% of Shore Ventures. Leo, through his family office, controlled another 4%. Together they represented a powerful voting bloc. Her next move was to approach the other key shareholders, starting with Robert Chen, a cautious old money investor who controlled a 10% stake and had always been wary of Grayson's aggressive high-risk strategies. They met in a private room at the university club. Kimberly didn't lead with the infidelity. She led with the numbers. She laid out the blueprints of Grayson's scheme, the Shell Corporation, the conflict of interest with Zoe Novak, the reckless leveraging of assets, and the immense legal and financial exposure it brought upon Shore Ventures. She presented it not as a scorned wife, but as a concerned shareholder protecting her investment. "Grayson's personal behavior has now become a material risk to this company," she stated calmly, sliding a file across the table. "He is using corporate funds to finance his affair and company resources to engage in a hostile takeover that benefits him personally, not the shareholders. Worse, he's leveraged a private trust in a way that borders on fraud. When this comes out, and it will, the stock will plummet, and we will all be facing federal investigation." Chen read through the summary, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is deeply troubling," he said, his fingers steepled. "But Grayson delivers results. The board will be reluctant to act." "Which is why I'm not just bringing them a problem," Kimberly said, leaning forward. "I'm bringing them a solution. I have been in quiet negotiations with the other primary debt holders of Connolly Renewables. With my own capital and a consortium of investors I've assembled, I am staging a counteroffer. I'm going to take Connolly Renewables private myself. I will save the company, honor its obligations, and rebuild it. I will do it the right way." She let that sink in. "When I've done that," she continued, "Grayson's Phoenix initiative will be worthless. All the capital he's poured into Nightingale Holdings will be lost. It will be the single biggest strategic failure in Shore Ventures' history. The stock will tank anyway. Or," she paused, letting the final piece of her plan fall into place, "the board can get ahead of it. They can force Grayson to divest from the project, now writing it off as a minor loss. They can install an interim CEO to calm the markets, and they can support my acquisition, which will then become a strategic partnership, with Shore Ventures turning a scandal into a feel-good story of corporate synergy and family legacy." Chen looked at her, a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. She wasn't just trying to hurt Grayson. She was offering the board a way out, a golden bridge to escape the fire that was coming. "And who do you propose as this interim CEO?" he asked. Kimberly gave him a small, confident smile. "Who better than the person who uncovered the risk and engineered the solution? I'm not just a shareholder, Robert. I ran my own successful firm for 10 years. I know how to build things. And right now, Shore Ventures needs someone to rebuild its integrity." It was an audacious move, a breathtaking gamble. She wasn't just planning to divorce her husband. She was planning a boardroom coup. She was going to take his company. For the next week, Kimberly and Leo worked the phones, relentlessly building their coalition. They secured the backing of Chen and 2 other major institutional investors. Together, they now controlled 35% of the voting shares. It might not be a majority, but it was enough to cause a firestorm. The stage was set. Ben Carter formally requested an emergency meeting of the Shaw Ventures Board of Directors. The stated purpose on the agenda was bland and corporate. To discuss a potential conflict of interest regarding Project Nightingale and its implications for shareholder value. Grayson would walk into that room, expecting a minor financial dispute. He had no idea he was walking into his own execution. Kimberly placed a hand on her belly, feeling the strong, steady kick of her son. "We're almost there," she thought. "I'm building a better world for you. One without your father's lies." The boardroom of Shaw Ventures was on the 80th floor, a glass-encased precipice that seemed to float above the city. It was Grayson's throne room, designed to intimidate and impress. On the morning of the meeting, however, the mood was not one of awe, but of thick, anxious tension. Grayson arrived last, exuding a forced, breezy confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had lost weight in the past weeks. The strain was showing. He nodded curtly to the board members, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Kimberly, who was seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, flanked by Ben Carter and her brother Leo. His eyes widened in genuine shock. He had expected to face her lawyers, not her. Seeing her there, calm and composed, in a stark white dress that accentuated her pregnancy, clearly unnerved him. She looked regal, untouchable. Beside her, Leo looked like a stoic sentinel. "Kimberly," Grayson began, his voice tight. "This is hardly the appropriate venue." "On the contrary, Grayson," she interrupted, her voice cool and clear, carrying across the silent room. "Given that you've so thoroughly blurred the lines between our personal life and this company's business, I can think of no more appropriate venue. Please have a seat. We have much to discuss." The other board members shifted uncomfortably. This was already far more personal than the agenda had suggested. Robert Chen, the senior board member Kimberly had won over, cleared his throat. "Grayson, this meeting has been called to address serious allegations regarding Project Nightingale. We'd like to hear your side." Grayson launched into his pre-prepared defense, a smooth and plausible narrative about a strategic acquisition designed to enter the green energy sector. He painted it as a visionary move, a surprise he had been planning for the company and his family. He completely omitted any mention of Zoe Novak by name, referring only to the invaluable analysis of our head of acquisitions. He thought he was controlling the narrative. He was wrong. When he finished, Kimberly didn't respond. She simply nodded to Ben Carter. Carter stood and began to distribute a thick, spiral-bound dossier to each board member. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonant and authoritative. "What Mr. Shaw has just described is a fiction. What you have in your hands is the fact." For the next 20 minutes, Carter systematically, dispassionately, and brutally dismantled Grayson's life. He presented bank statements from Nightingale Holdings, showing direct payments to Zoe Novak for her apartment, her car, her lavish lifestyle, all funded by a corporate account. He showed emails between Grayson and Zoe, discussing not just the affair, but the specific proprietary weaknesses of Connolly Renewables she had brought with her from her previous employer, a clear case of corporate espionage. A low murmur went through the room. Grayson's face had gone from confident to ashen. Then Carter moved to the final fatal blow. "And finally," he said, flipping to the last tab, "you will find the documentation proving that to secure the final round of financing for this project, Mr. Shaw illegally leveraged a private, non-corporate asset as collateral, specifically the Connolly Family Trust, an instrument established for the benefit of his unborn child. A collective gasp went through the room. This wasn't just a dalliance or a shady deal. This was a profound, indefensible breach of ethics, a potential felony. They were looking at racketeering wire fraud, a full-blown SEC nightmare. "The personal indiscretion is Mr. Shaw's own business," Carter concluded, his eyes locking on Grayson. "But the corporate malfeasance, the fraud, the exposure of this company to massive legal and financial risk, that is the board's business." Grayson stared at Kimberly, his eyes a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You," he whispered, the single word filled with venom. "You did this?" Kimberly finally met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. "You did this to yourself?" "Grayson," she said, her voice even. "I am simply protecting my interests, my son's interests, and the interests of every other shareholder in this room." Robert Chen spoke, his voice heavy with finality. "Grayson, in light of this information, we have no choice. The board has lost confidence in your leadership. We are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman." The king had been deposed in his own throne room. But Kimberly wasn't finished. Before Grayson could respond, she addressed the board. "His resignation is only the first step," she said, her voice now filled with command. "Shaw Ventures must immediately divest from Nightingale Holdings and cease all action related to the acquisition of Connolly Renewables. It is a tainted, failed project that will only bring this company ruin." "And what happens then?" another board member asked. "The capital is lost. The strategy is dead." "Not entirely," Kimberly said, standing up. It was a power move drawing every eye to her. "As it happens, I have spent the last several weeks organizing a private consortium to acquire Connolly Renewables myself. We close tomorrow. My intention is to rebuild it into the powerhouse it once was." She let the audacity of her move settle over them. "This board has two choices," she declared. "You can let this scandal break, let the stock plummet and spend the next 5 years in litigation. Or you can partner with me. We announce Grayson's resignation for personal reasons. We announce a new strategic partnership between Shaw Ventures and the newly revitalized Connolly Renewables, led by me. You turn this catastrophic failure into a story of innovation and stability. And to oversee this new chapter, you appoint an interim CEO who understands the challenges ahead and has a vested interest in a stable, profitable future for this company." She paused, looking each board member in the eye. "You appoint me." Silence. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. She hadn't just come to depose the king. She had come to take his throne. Grayson finally broke a harsh, strangled laugh escaping his lips. "They will never," he hissed. "They will never give my company to you." But as Kimberly looked at the faces around the table, faces of panicked, pragmatic business people who saw a lifeline being thrown to them, she knew he was wrong. They weren't seeing the betrayed wife anymore. They were seeing a savior, a shark every bit as ruthless as the man they were about to throw to the wolves. Robert Chen looked from Grayson's enraged, defeated face to Kimberly's cool, determined one. He made a decision. All those in favor of accepting Mr. Shaw's resignation. Every hand but Grayson's went up. And all those in favor of appointing Kimberly Connolly as interim CEO effective immediately. Again, a forest of hands. It was over. In the space of 30 minutes, Kimberly had taken everything from him. His company, his reputation, his future. She had not just divorced him. She had erased him. Grayson stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. He looked at Kimberly, his face a mask of pure fury. "You will regret this," he seethed. Kimberly looked back at him, her expression unyielding. "The only thing I regret," she said, her voice dropping so only he could hear, "is that I didn't see who you truly were sooner. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Shaw, this is a private meeting for the board and its CEO. Security will see you out." 6 months later, the city was blanketed in the first snow of a new year. From her office, Grayson's old office now redesigned with clean lines, light wood and sketches of her architectural projects, Kimberly looked out at the swirling white flakes. Her world, once shattered, had been rebuilt on a foundation of her own making. The fallout from the boardroom coup had been swift and brutal. Grayson Shaw, once the titan of the tech world, became a pariah. The details of the scandal, expertly leaked by Ben Carter's office to select financial journalists, painted a picture not of a powerful man brought down by a scorned woman, but of a reckless CEO whose personal failings had threatened his entire company. He was facing multiple SEC investigations and a slew of shareholder lawsuits. He had vanished from the public eye, rumored to be holed up in a villa in Dubai, his fortune vastly diminished by the divorce settlement and legal fees. Zoe Novak had disappeared even more completely. Fired for cause and facing her own legal troubles for corporate espionage, her career was over. She was a footnote in the story of Grayson's downfall, a casualty of a war she hadn't been equipped to fight. Kimberly, however, had thrived. As interim CEO of Shaw Ventures, a title the board quickly made permanent, she had moved decisively. She stabilized the company, cut the fat from Grayson's vanity projects, and refocused its mission on sustainable long-term growth. She proved to be a natural leader, her quiet, analytical style, a welcome change from Grayson's volatile charisma. Her true passion, however, was Connolly Renewables. She poured her heart and soul into it, bringing in a new management team, investing in research and development, and securing major new contracts. She was not just restoring her family's legacy. She was making it her own, forging it into something stronger and more innovative than it had ever been. But her greatest achievement was not in the boardroom. 3 months ago, she had given birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She had named her Grace Connolly, not Shaw. The nursery, once a space of anxious hope, was now a sanctuary of pure joy. Kimberly found a balance she never knew was possible, leaving the office at a reasonable hour trading stock reports for story time and finding more fulfillment in her daughter's gurgling laugh than in any billion-dollar deal. Her brother Leo was a constant, doting presence, the perfect uncle. Her life was filled with a quiet, authentic happiness that the gilded cage of her marriage had never allowed. One afternoon, as she was rocking Grace to sleep, her phone buzzed with a message from an unsaved number. She opened it. It was a single sentence. "I hope you're happy." She knew it was from Grayson. There was no anger in the message, only a hollowed-out emptiness. For a fleeting moment, she felt a sliver of pity for the man he had become. But it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of peace. She didn't delete the message. She didn't block the number. She simply typed a one-word reply. "I am." She put the phone down and looked at the sleeping baby in her arms, her daughter, her future. The empire Grayson had built was a thing of the past, a monument to a failed king. The empire she was building, now an empire of integrity, legacy, and love, was just beginning. She was Kimberly Connolly, CEO, mother, survivor. And for the first time in a very long time, she was free. So what happens when a woman's perfect life is revealed to be a perfect lie? For Kimberly Shaw, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. She transformed her deepest heartbreak into her greatest strength, proving that the most powerful empires aren't built on money or deceit, but on resilience and truth. She didn't just get revenge. She got redemption. reclaiming her name, her legacy, and her future for herself and her child. Her story is a powerful reminder that the person you become in the face of betrayal is a choice. You can crumble, or you can build something even more magnificent from the ruins. What did you think of Kimberly's ultimate move? Was it justice, or was it a masterclass in revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of strength and strategy, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story of triumph, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. In the glittering world of the ultra-rich appearances are everything. A world of private jets, 9-figure deals, and charity galas where the cost of the champagne could fund a small village for a year. In this world, Jasper Drake was a king, a self-made tech billionaire who had everything he ever wanted. And by his side was his wife, Grace, elegant, quiet, and in his eyes, increasingly plain. He saw her as a comfortable accessory, a relic of a past he had outgrown. But he forgot one crucial rule of the elite. The most dangerous players are the ones who never need to show their cards. What happens when the woman you dismiss is the one holding the entire deck? This is the story of a public humiliation that sparked a private war, and a wife who reminded her husband and the world that true power isn't worn on your sleeve, it's woven into the very fabric of your soul. The air in the back of the Rolls-Royce Cullinan was thick with an expensive, suffocating silence. It smelled of Italian leather and Grace's subtle gardenia-scented perfume, a fragrance Jasper Drake had once claimed to love. Now he didn't seem to notice it at all. His face, illuminated by the cold blue light of his phone, was a mask of chiseled indifference. He scrolled through stock market data, his thumb moving with a relentless, sharp efficiency that defined his entire existence. Grace smoothed a hand over the fabric of her dress. It was a deep, sapphire blue silk, a classic A-line, cut by a lesser-known but brilliant designer. She admired Carolina Herrera. It was understated, elegant, and timeless. It was in every way her. "Do you think the blue is too understated for the Starlight Gala?" she asked, her voice soft, a gentle probe into the fortress of his concentration. Jasper didn't look up. "It's fine, Jenin. It's a dress." "It's for the Children's Hospital fundraiser," she added, a hint of hope in her voice. "I thought something classic would be more appropriate than flashy." He finally lowered his phone, his grey eyes sweeping over her in a clinical, 1-second appraisal. It wasn't the look of a husband admiring his wife. It was the look of an investor assessing an asset that was underperforming. "Flashy is the point," he said, his tone flat. "People don't donate $100,000 at a charity auction because you look appropriate. They do it because they're caught up in the spectacle, the glamour. You look like you're heading to a parent-teacher conference, not the year's biggest philanthropic event." The words were like tiny shards of glass, and though she was used to them, they still found a way to cut. For 5 years, Grace had tried to be the perfect wife for the man he was becoming. She'd hosted his soulless dinner parties, smiled at his crass business partners, and tolerated the endless parade of ambitious sycophants who orbited him. She had muted her own colors, hoping to fit into the sleek monochrome world he was building. I don't feel comfortable in those skin-tight sequined things everyone wears," she confessed quietly. "It's not about comfort, Grace. It's about image." He sighed, turning back to his phone, as if the conversation was already a waste of his valuable time. "Our image." The unspoken word hung in the air. "My image." The car glided to a stop before the grand entrance of the museum, and the world outside erupted into a frenzy of flashing lights and muted shouts. The Starlight Foundation Gala was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. As they stepped onto the red carpet, the cameras descended like hungry locusts. Jasper was in his element. He smiled, a perfectly calibrated display of power and charm. He placed a hand on the small of Grace's back, a proprietary gesture that was more for the cameras than for her. She smiled too, a practiced, gentle curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. Inside the grand hall was a breathtaking sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Diamonds dripped from necks and wrists, and the air buzzed with the low hum of immense wealth. Jasper immediately released her, his eyes scanning the crowd for opportunities for connections, for anyone more important than the woman standing next to him. Within minutes, he was absorbed into a circle of private equity magnates, leaving Grace to drift alone. She was accustomed to this. She would find the other philanthropic wives discuss the charity, admire the art, and count the minutes until she could retreat back into the quiet solitude of her library at home. But tonight felt different. A sense of dread coiled in her stomach. It wasn't long before she saw why. Sauntering through the crowd like a panther in red sequins was Crystal Jennings. Crystal was an Instagram model turned brand ambassador, a woman whose entire career was built on being seen. Her dress was a sliver of crimson fabric that left little to the imagination. Her lips were plumped to a caricature of a pout, and her laughter was loud and brassy, designed to draw attention. And its primary target was Jasper. Grace watched from across the room as Crystal draped herself over Jasper's arm. He didn't pull away. He laughed at her jokes, his head tilted towards hers, their bodies closer than was appropriate for a married man and a single woman in such a public forum. A familiar ache bloomed in Grace's chest, a dull, weary pain she had learned to live with. She turned away, making her way towards a quieter alcove near a collection of impressionist paintings. She was pretending to study a Monet when a voice, dripping with saccharine condescension, sliced through her thoughts. "Grace, darling, I almost didn't recognize you." Crystal Jennings stood before her, a champagne flute in one hand, her eyes doing a slow, insulting crawl from Grace's simple pearl earrings down to her sensible satin pumps. "Crystal," Grace said, her voice even. "Enjoying the evening?" "Immensely." Crystal purred, taking a deliberate step closer. "Though I must say, you're brave." "Brave?" Grace asked, bracing herself. "To wear that," Crystal said, gesturing vaguely at Grace's dress with her flute. "In a room full of Balenciaga and Versace, you went with, what is that, Talbot's? It's very down to earth. Did you get lost on your way to the library fundraiser?" A few people nearby glanced over their conversations, faltering. Crystal's voice was pitched just loud enough to be overheard. This was a performance. Grace's cheeks burned. "It's Carolina Herrera," she stated, keeping her chin high. Crystal let out a tinkling, cruel laugh. "Oh, honey, of course it is. But it looks like something one finds in a high-end consignment shop. You know, for the divorced wives of dentists. Jasper is such a titan, a real predator in the business world. You'd think he'd want a lioness by his side, not a house cat." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over Grace. Her eyes flickered across the room, searching for her husband. He was watching. He saw the whole exchange, the smirk on Crystal's face, the shocked pity on the faces of onlookers. And he did nothing. He just stood there, a glass in his hand, a passive observer to his own wife's vivisection. That was the moment something inside Grace, something that had been slowly cracking for years, finally shattered. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a tight whisper. She turned, walking past Crystal without another word. She didn't run. Her movements were deliberate, dignified. She walked straight towards the exit, past the marble statues and the whispering guests. She didn't look back at her husband, who was now frowning in Crystal's direction, not with anger at the mistress, but with annoyance at the wife who was creating a scene by leaving. As the doorman hailed her a taxi, she couldn't bear the thought of waiting for the rolls. The cool night air hit her face. The tears she had refused to shed in front of them finally came hot and silent. It wasn't about the dress. It was never about the dress. It was about the utter soul-crushing invisibility. The realization that she wasn't a partner in her husband's life. She was a placeholder, and a poorly dressed one at that. In the back of the yellow cab, speeding away from the museum's glittering facade, she wiped her tears with a sudden, fierce resolve. The house cat was done. The lioness was about to be woken. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She didn't call her mother or her best friend. She scrolled deep into her contacts to a name she hadn't dialed in over 6 years, a number in Paris. The phone rang twice before a deep, heavily accented voice answered. "Allô? Antoine." Grace said, her voice trembling but gaining strength with each word. "It's General Grace Devereaux." She hadn't used her maiden name in years, saying it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she had locked away. There was a pause on the other end, then a warm, booming laugh of recognition. "Chère Grace, my little nightingale, I thought you had vanished from the earth, married to that American computer boy. To what do I owe this pleasure after so long?" "I need your help," Grace said, the city lights blurring past the window. "I need more than help. I need an artist. I need a miracle. And I need a war." Antoine Dubois, the legendary head of the eponymous couture house, chuckled again, a low, intrigued rumble. "Ma chérie," he said, his voice alive with sudden interest. "For you I will build an army." The flight to Paris was an act of rebellion. Grace didn't tell Jasper. She left a simple 2-line note on the cold marble of the kitchen island. "I've gone to visit family. I will be back in a few days." She packed a single suitcase, leaving behind the carefully curated wardrobe of Mrs. Drake and taking only the essentials. The private jet that whisked her across the Atlantic wasn't one of Jasper's. It was a Gulfstream G650 that belonged to the Devereaux Foundation, summoned with a single discreet text message. Jasper's response was a perfunctory text, hours later. "Fine, let me know when you're back." He didn't ask which family. He didn't ask if she was okay. He likely felt relieved to have her out of the way. It would give him unfettered time with Crystal. The thought, which once would have sent a spear of jealousy through her heart, now merely fueled the cold fire of her resolve. Paris was not just a city to Grace. It was a homecoming. She wasn't Grace Drake, the tech billionaire's quiet wife here. She was Grace Devereaux, the only daughter of Jean-Luc and Isabelle Devereaux, a family whose name was whispered with reverence in the worlds of art finance and haute couture. The Devereaux fortune wasn't new and flashy like Jasper's. It was an ancient, sprawling empire built over centuries, rooted in banking vineyards in Bordeaux and a portfolio of impressionist art that could rival the Musée d'Orsay. She had walked away from it all for Jasper. She had met him during her graduate studies at Columbia, a brilliant, hungry and charming disruptor who saw her as Grace, the art history student, not Grace, the heiress. She'd fallen in love with the idea of being loved for herself, not her name. She had deliberately hidden the scale of her family's wealth, wanting to build a life on their own terms. But over time, as his star ascended, his hunger had turned into a different kind of appetite, one for status, for recognition, for the very world she had tried to escape. And in his eyes, she had become a relic of his humbler past, not the key to a future he couldn't even comprehend. The Atelier Dubois was tucked away on a quiet street off the Place Vendôme, its entrance so discreet you could walk past it a dozen times and never know that inside magic was being spun from thread and silk. Antoine Dubois greeted her at the door himself. He was a man in his late 70s with a shock of white hair, round spectacles, and an energy that could exhaust a man half his age. He embraced her in a hug that smelled of expensive cologne and creativity. "My nightingale," he boomed, holding her at arm's length. "Look at you. The sadness in your eyes is a crime against beauty. We will fix this. Come tell Uncle Antoine everything." Over cups of impossibly strong espresso in his private salon, surrounded by sketches and bolts of exquisite fabric, Grace told him. She didn't cry. She recounted the gala, the mockery of her dress, Crystal's cruel words, and the profound, crushing indifference in her husband's eyes. She spoke of the years of being made to feel small, plain, and inadequate. Antoine listened, his expression growing stormier with each word. "This boy," he finally said, his voice a low growl. "This vendeur d'ordinateurs. He takes a swan and tries to convince her she is a pigeon. He doesn't see you, Grace. He sees a brand. And you are not a brand. You are a masterpiece." He stood up, pacing the room with renewed vigor. "So, we do not just make a dress. A dress is a bandage for a wound. We are not interested in bandages. We are interested in armor. We will remind this world and this little husband of yours exactly who a Devereux is." The next 3 days were a whirlwind. This was not a shopping trip. It was the strategic assembly of an arsenal. Antoine didn't take her to boutiques. He took her into the archives, the hallowed, climate-controlled vaults beneath his atelier, where pieces of fashion history were preserved. "Anyone with a black card can buy the latest season's Versace," he explained, running a reverent hand over a garment bag. "It is meaningless. It is loud, but it has nothing to say. A Devereux does not shout. She speaks, and the world leans in to listen." He unveiled his plan. Jasper had a major event in 10 days, the Drake Innovations Future Gala, a lavish affair to unveil his company's new satellite technology. It would be the biggest night of his career, with international media tech moguls and government investors in attendance. "This is our stage," Antoine declared. "You will not arrive with him. You will arrive separately. You will not be his wife. You will be an event in your own right." The centerpiece was the dress. Antoine had selected a piece from his own 1996 archival collection, a gown that had only ever been worn once on the runway. It was nicknamed the Starfall. It was not a dress of sequins and cutouts. It was a column of midnight blue silk velvet, so dark it was almost black. The fabric was specially woven to absorb light, creating an effect of infinite depth, and cascading down one shoulder across the bodice and pooling at the floor was an intricate hand-stitched embroidery of platinum thread and antique diamonds laid out to perfectly replicate the Cygnus constellation. It was a dress that didn't scream for attention. It commanded it with the silent, overwhelming power of the night sky. "But the dress is only the beginning," Antoine said, his eyes gleaming. He made another call. An hour later, a severe-looking woman with a leather briefcase arrived. She was from Cartier, from their high jewelry division, a department that served clients, so exclusive it didn't even have a public name. She opened the case on a velvet tray. Inside lay the Saphir du Ciel, the sky sapphire. It was a legendary 120-carat cornflower blue sapphire of Ceylonese origin, surrounded by a constellation of its own diamonds. It hadn't been seen in public for 50 years. It was part of the Devereux private collection, on loan to Cartier for museum exhibitions. It was Grace's birthright. She had never once worn a piece from the family vault, believing it to be too ostentatious. Now she looked at it not as a piece of jewelry, but as a weapon. The final pieces fell into place. Antoine styled her entire look from the custom-made velvet heels by René Cauvilla to the simple, elegant chignon that would let the gown and the necklace do their work. He coached her. "Walk slowly," he instructed as she practiced in the grand salon. "Let them look. Do not smile for them. A slight enigmatic curve of the lips, nothing more. You are not there to please them. You are there to be witnessed. Your husband wants a spectacle. We will give him a masterpiece of art and history. Let his little plastic girlfriend compete with that." On the fourth day, Grace felt a shift within herself. Standing before the mirror in Antoine's salon, draped in history and power, she didn't see the quiet, accommodating wife she had been. She saw the granddaughter of Isabelle Devereux, a woman who had faced down presidents and titans of industry with nothing more than a cool smile and an iron will. She felt the weight of her legacy not as a burden, but as a mantle of strength. She sent one final carefully worded email, not to her husband, but to a name high on the guest list of the future gala, Marco Baldini, the editor-in-chief of Vogue Europe. She and Marco's families had summered together in the south of France for decades. The email read, "Marco, I know it's last minute, but I'll be attending the Drake Innovations Gala. I'll be wearing something from Antoine's archives. I thought you might find it photographically interesting. All my best, Jen Devereux." The response came in under a minute. "Gigi, the world has missed you. Consider my entire photo team at your disposal. This will be the cover, not of the society pages, of the September issue. Welcome back." Monsieur Grace smiled. The pieces were set. The stage was waiting. Jasper was about to unveil his future, but he had no idea he was about to be eclipsed by a past he never even knew existed. The night of the Drake Innovations Future Gala was a symphony of orchestrated chaos. The venue was a marvel of modern architecture, a newly constructed glass pavilion overlooking the city skyline. Searchlights sliced through the night sky, painting the clouds with the PI logo. The red carpet was even more frantic than the one at the Starlight Gala. This was not society. This was power. Tech journalists from every major outlet, camera crews from global news networks, and an army of photographers were all there to capture the arrival of the titans of the digital age. Jasper Drake arrived early, basking in the glow. He was the sun around which this entire universe revolved. By his side, in a shimmering, molten gold dress that clung to every curve, was Crystal Jennings. Her presence was a bold public statement. Jasper hadn't even had the decency to call Grace in Paris to ask when she was returning to even pretend to want her there. He had simply replaced her, assuming she would retreat quietly, as she always did. He held Crystal's hand, smiling for the cameras, presenting her as his dazzling consort. Crystal was preening. "Isn't Jasper just a genius?" she gushed to a reporter from TechCrunch. "He's literally changing the world tonight. It's so inspiring to be with a man who is at the absolute peak of his game." Inside the pavilion was buzzing. Jasper worked the room, Crystal a glittering limpet on his arm, accepting congratulations, shaking hands with venture capitalists, and explaining his vision for the future to a senator. He felt invincible. Tonight was his coronation. At precisely 8:30 p.m., a ripple of confusion started at the entrance. The frenzied energy of the press pit, which had begun to die down, suddenly reignited with a ferocity that made Jasper turn his head. A car was pulling up, but it wasn't a company Tesla or a sleek Maybach. It was a vintage 1961 Rolls-Royce Phantom Fish, a car of quiet, regal authority. It was a car that didn't belong in the world of disruptive tech and fast money. It belonged to another era, another class of wealth altogether. The doorman, a man accustomed to seeing celebrities and billionaires every day, seemed to stand a little straighter as he opened the passenger door. A single velvet-clad heel touched the pavement. A collective gasp went through the press line. The camera flashes, which had been sporadic, erupted into a solid, blinding wall of light. It was a reception reserved for royalty or Hollywood legends. Jasper frowned, squinting towards the entrance. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered to the investor he was talking to. Crystal craned her neck. Probably some ancient Hollywood actress trying to stay relevant. She scoffed, a flicker of annoyance on her face that someone was stealing her spotlight. Then the woman stepped out. She moved with an unhurried liquid grace. The dress of midnight velvet seemed to drink the frantic light of the cameras, making her the calm, dark center of a chaotic universe. The platinum and diamond constellation embroidered on the gown caught the flashes and threw them back, not as a gaudy sparkle, but as the cool, distant shimmer of actual stars. Around her neck, the sapphire du ciel rested against her collarbone, a mesmerizing pool of deep celestial blue, a stone so magnificent it seemed to possess its own gravitational pull. Her hair was swept back, her face serene and sculpted. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was one of calm, almost regal detachment. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked straight ahead, as if the entire screaming mob of photographers was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The whispers started rippling through the crowd, spreading from the red carpet into the pavilion. "Is that a vintage Dubois? My God, look at the necklace. Is that? It can't be. The Devereux sapphire. Who is she? Wait, is that Drake's wife?" Jasper heard the whispers. He saw the woman, but his brain couldn't connect the two. The woman at the door was an apparition of elegance and power. She was art. She was history. She was everything his world of cold, hard code and aggressive growth was not. His wife was the woman in the sensible blue dress, the quiet, mousy woman who arranged flowers and managed their social calendar. And then she turned her head slightly, and the light caught her profile. And Jasper Drake froze. His champagne glass, halfway to his lips, stopped. The blood drained from his face. The air left his lungs in a silent whoosh. The chattering senator beside him, the hum of the crowd, the entire multi-million-dollar event he had orchestrated it all, faded into a muffled, distant roar. It was Grace. His Grace. But it wasn't. This woman carried herself with an authority he had never seen. The quiet uncertainty was gone, replaced by a formidable stillness. The gentle deference in her eyes had been supplanted by an unreadable, intelligent calm. She wasn't looking for his approval. She didn't even seem to be aware of his existence. Marco Baldini, the editor of Vogue Europe, suddenly appeared by her side, kissing her on both cheeks. "Gigi, you are a vision," he murmured loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The world is not ready." He personally escorted her through the entrance, parting the sea of stunned onlookers. Crystal's jaw was literally hanging open. Her molten gold dress, which had seemed so glamorous moments before, now looked cheap and garish next to the timeless masterpiece Grace was wearing. Her own professionally applied confidence evaporated, replaced by a raw, ugly shock. That's your wife," she stammered, her voice a strangled squeak. "What is she wearing? Where did she get the—" Jasper couldn't answer. He was paralyzed, a statue in a bespoke suit. His mind was racing, trying to process the impossible data before him. The dress, the necklace, the car. The way Marco Baldini, a man who had snubbed him for a cover story 3 times, was fawning over her. None of it computed. He had built his empire on understanding systems, on predicting outcomes. This was a variable he had never even conceived of. Grace glided into the pavilion. She didn't look for him. Her eyes scanned the room with a cool, appraising gaze. She saw a group of people standing near a large, abstract painting, the elderly matriarch of a European banking family, a Japanese tech investor, known for his legendary art collection, and the French cultural attaché. They were the true power in the room, the old money elites Jasper had been trying to impress for years, with little success. And then the most baffling thing happened. As Grace approached them, their faces lit up with genuine warmth and recognition. "Grâce, ma chérie," the French attaché exclaimed, taking her hands. "It has been too long. You look just like your mother did at the Élysée Palace in '98. The Japanese investor bowed his head slightly. "Mrs. Drake, or should I say, Mademoiselle Devereux. The sapphire is even more breathtaking in person. An honor to finally see it." Jasper watched, rooted to the spot, as his wife, the woman he had deemed too plain, too boring, too appropriate, was welcomed into the inner sanctum of a world he could only press his face against the glass of. They weren't talking to her as Jasper Drake's wife. They were talking to her as one of their own. He felt a cold dread, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his company was on the verge of bankruptcy years ago. It was the feeling of being completely and utterly out of his depth. The foundation of his world, his carefully constructed hierarchy, where he sat at the top, had just been fractured by a woman he thought he owned, arriving in a dress and a history he couldn't possibly afford. The cameras were still flashing, but for the first time that night, none of them were pointed at him. The chill that had frozen Jasper in place began to spread through his veins. He was a man who commanded rooms, who dominated negotiations, who controlled every variable. Now he was a ghost at his own celebration, watching a narrative unfold that he had no part in writing. Grace was a celestial body that had entered his orbit and thrown everything off its axis. She moved through the party with an effortless grace, a queen holding court. She didn't rush. She didn't seek anyone out. Instead, people came to her. A quiet word here, a shared laugh there. She spoke fluent French. With the attaché discussed the nuances of the Japanese Edo period with the investor, and debated the merits of a philanthropic initiative with the banking matriarch. She was not just participating in their world, she was a pillar of it. Crystal, recovering from her initial shock, was now vibrating with a toxic mix of jealousy and confusion. "Go talk to her," she hissed at Jasper, digging her painted nails into his arm. "What is going on? This is your night. She's ruining it." Jasper flinched, pulling his arm away. For the first time, Crystal's voice grated on him. Her gilded glamour, which he had found so intoxicating, now seemed shrill and one-dimensional. She was complaining about a ruined party while he was witnessing the complete implosion of his perceived reality. He finally moved his legs, feeling like lead. He started towards Grace, his mind a frantic jumble of questions. As he approached, he saw Crystal, unable to restrain herself, break away and stride toward Grace first. It was a disastrous miscalculation. Crystal intercepted Grace as she was concluding a conversation. "Well, well," Crystal began, her tone dripping with forced nonchalance. "Quite the entrance. You finally decided to raid your grandmother's closet." Grace turned slowly. She didn't offer a retort. She simply looked at Crystal. Her gaze was not angry or hurt. It was something far more devastating. It was dismissive. She looked at Crystal Jennings the way a geologist might look at a common pebble, with a brief clinical assessment of its unremarkable nature, before turning her attention back to something of value. She held Crystal's gaze for a single, silent beat, then turned back to the cultural attaché. "As I was saying, Etienne," she continued, her voice calm and clear, The Foundation is prepared to underwrite the entire Louvre restoration project for the Napoleonic wing. The dismissal was so total, so profound, that it was more effective than any insult. Crystal was left standing there, her mouth slightly agape, rendered utterly irrelevant. She had tried to start a fight with fists, only to find her opponent was waging a war with capital and culture. Humiliated, she flushed a deep red and scurried back to the bar. Now it was Jasper's turn. He managed to get Grace alone for a moment near the towering glass wall overlooking the city. "Jen," he said, his voice strained. "What is this? What are you wearing? That necklace?" "It's a dress, Jasper," she replied, her voice cool and even echoing his own dismissive words from the car ride to the Starlight Gala. "And a family heirloom." "Family heirloom. Your father was a history professor, and your mother a librarian," he said, bewildered. It was the story she had told him, a simplified version of the truth. Her father was a professor, but of economic history at the Sorbonne, and he sat on the board of the World Bank. Her mother was a librarian, but she was the chief acquisitions librarian for the Devereux Art Foundation. Grace allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. "I never lied to you, Jasper. I just allowed you to believe the version of my life that you were comfortable with. You never asked for more." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. He had never been curious about her past beyond the superficial. He had seen what he wanted to see, a smart, pretty, uncomplicated woman from a respectable but unremarkable background, someone who wouldn't overshadow him. "The Devereux Foundation," he asked, the name finally clicking in his head from the conversation he'd overheard. "The one that's a silent partner in half the tech startups in Silicon Valley, the one everyone calls the Kingmaker Fund. My grandfather started it," she said simply, as if discussing the weather. "I'm on the acquisitions board." Jasper felt the floor drop out from under him. He had spent the last 2 years desperately trying to get a meeting with the Devereux Foundation to secure their investment for his next phase of expansion. He had been courting their junior partners, wining and dining, their analysts completely unaware that the key to the entire kingdom was sleeping in his bed every night, a key he had dismissed as a decorative trinket. But the final, most devastating twist was yet to come. The centerpiece of the evening was a private auction to fund a STEM education initiative, a pet project of Jasper's. The highlight was the sale of a small, obscure tech patent he owned, which he was donating to kickstart the bidding. The real purpose, however, was to attract a specific buyer. For months, the tech and art worlds had been buzzing about a mysterious, anonymous collector, known only by the pseudonym Ariadne. Ariadne was known for making bold, unexpected acquisitions, buying up everything from rare earth mineral rights to contemporary art, to most recently pivotal tech patents. Ariadne's involvement would lend his event an incredible level of prestige. He had secretly invited a representative hoping Ariadne would bid. The auctioneer took the stage. "We will now begin the bidding for the Drake Continuum patent," he announced. "A revolutionary piece of data compression technology. We will open the bidding at $1 million. The room was quiet. 1 million was a steep opening. "Do I have 1 million? The auctioneer asked. A hand went up in the back. A man in a simple grey suit. 1 million from the representative of Ariadne. The auctioneer confirmed a buzz going through the crowd. An executive from a rival company bid 2 million. Ariadne's rep bid 5. The rival bid 6. Ariadne's rep instantly countered. 10 million! The room gasped. Jasper's heart pounded. This was exactly what he wanted. A bidding war driven by the mystique of Ariadne would make his patent, and by extension, him legendary. The rival executive, looking flustered, conferred with his team and reluctantly shook his head. $10 million, the auctioneer said, his voice booming. Going once, going twice. Before he could say, sold saw, Grace, who had been standing silently beside Jasper, spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence of the massive room with absolute clarity. 20 million, she said. The entire pavilion went dead silent. Every single head turned towards her. The auctioneer stared his gavel, frozen in mid-air. Jasper looked at her, as if she had just sprouted wings. "Jen, what are you doing?" he whispered frantically. "This is a charity auction. That's my patent." Grace didn't look at him. She looked at Ariadne's representative in the back, who was staring at her with wide-eyed shock before a slow smile of understanding spread across his face. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod and lowered his hand, officially withdrawing from the bidding. I have a bid of $20 million from Mrs. Drake." The auctioneer stammered, looking at Jasper for confirmation. Jasper couldn't speak. His throat was dry. "The bid," Grace corrected him calmly, her voice resonating with quiet power, "is from Ariadne." The collective intake of breath in the room was like a vacuum. The puzzle pieces didn't just click into place. They slammed together with the force of a thunderclap. The mysterious collector, the powerhouse investor, everyone had been chasing the cultural icon maker, was Grace Devereaux Drake. "Going once," the auctioneer said, his voice trembling with excitement. "Going twice, sold for $20 million to Ariadne." The room erupted, not in applause, but in a frantic, feverish buzz of conversation. Jasper just stood there, his mind a white void. He had been trying to impress Ariadne all night, hoping to catch the eye of this powerful unseen force, while the entire time she had been standing beside him, invisible to him, in her plain blue dress. He had built this entire gala, this monument to his own success, only to discover that he was just a minor character in his own wife's far grander story. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had failed to see her at all, and in a room full of the world's most powerful people, Jasper Drake had never felt so small. The gala ended, not with a bang, but with the silent, decisive click of a vintage car door. Jasper watched the Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 pull away from the curb, its taillights receding into the city's glow until they were indistinguishable from the constellation of street lamps. The cacophony of the party he had orchestrated, the music, the chatter, the clinking glasses, faded into a dull, meaningless hum in his ears. He was adrift in the center of his own triumph, a king on a floating island, watching the continent of his reality drift away. People swirled around him, their faces flushed with champagne and excitement. A senator clapped him on the shoulder, congratulating him on a successful evening, his words about the future of technology lost in the roaring static of Jasper's thoughts. An investor shook his hand, her eyes alight with the news of Ariadne. But Jasper's grip was limp, his focus 1,000 yards away. He was a ghost at his own coronation, haunted by the living spectre of the wife he thought he knew. He went home alone, the drive in the sleek, silent Maybach, a car he usually took immense pride in, felt like a journey in a hearse. He was chauffeured back to their sprawling penthouse, a monument of glass and steel perched atop the city, designed to make him feel like a god surveying his domain. Tonight, it felt like a cage. The floor-to-ceiling windows that usually displayed his kingdom now seemed to mock him, reflecting the image of a solitary, diminished man. The space was filled with a silence that was profoundly different from its usual quiet. It was no longer the serene quiet of minimalist luxury. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absence. On a beautifully sculpted armchair in the living room, a simple beige cashmere cardigan was draped one of Grace's, one of the boring pieces he'd subtly mocked. He walked over and touched the sleeve. The fabric was impossibly soft, still holding the faint, familiar scent of gardenia. It was a relic from a life that had existed only hours ago, a life he had carelessly dismantled. The scent, once a simple background note, now accused him. Sleep was an impossibility. He spent the night pacing the cold marble floors, his tablet in hand, as the first wave of news stories broke. The headlines were a series of brutal body blows. The Devereux has landed philanthropic heiress, Grace Devereux, Drake revealed as enigmatic investor, Ariadne. More than a muse. How a vintage Dubois gown and a legendary sapphire stole the show and announced a new power player, the Drake Gala's real story, not tech, but the re-emergence of a dynasty. He scrolled through photo after photo, Grace stepping from the car, a vision of midnight and stars. Grace speaking with the French cultural attaché, her expression poised and confident. Grace making her bid, her calm voice silencing a room of titans. Her Jasper Drake, the architect of the evening, was a background character, in every shot a blurred figure in a bespoke suit, his expression a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. The media had captured his exact moment of irrelevance for the entire world to see. The week that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare, waged with absolute silence. His texts, first demanding, then pleading, then apologetic, were delivered but never read. His calls rang and rang before being swallowed by the detached politeness of voicemail. He was a man who could get anyone in the world on the phone in under 5 minutes, yet he couldn't reach his own wife. He ordered his top financial analysts to dig into the Devereux Foundation. They came back with pages of public data, their philanthropic work, their board of directors, their historical investments. But the real ledgers, the true scale of their influence, were a black box. For the first time in his professional life, Jasper was confronted with a power that could not be hacked, bought or bullied. It was old-patient and utterly impenetrable. His world began to subtly tilt. The way his executive assistant Brenda looked at him had changed. There was a new flicker of something in her eyes, pity perhaps, or a newfound respect for the woman she had only ever known as the quiet, polite Mrs. Drake. The calls from his board members were no longer just congratulatory. They were inquisitive, laced with questions about Grace, about the Devereux connection, questions he had no answers for. His carefully built universe had been predicated on the idea that he was its smartest, most powerful inhabitant. That illusion was now shattered. She finally came to him, a full week after the gala. She didn't come to their home, the space that held the ghost of their shared life. She came to his office, the citadel of his power. Brenda announced her arrival, not with an intercom call, but by personally knocking on his office door, her voice hushed with reverence. "Mr. Drake, your wife, is here to see you." When Grace walked in, she was not the celestial vision from the gala, nor the quiet woman in cashmere. She was a third person, one he had never seen before. Dressed in a razor-sharp navy blue suit by the row, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, she was the very picture of corporate authority. She carried a slim leather portfolio, and her movements were crisp, economical, and devoid of any sentimentality. She looked at the office, at his oversized desk, his awards, the panoramic view he was so proud of, with the cool, appraising eye of a potential buyer. He stood his heart, hammering against his ribs. "Jen," he began, his voice hoarse, "thank God, I've been so worried. We need to talk. I had no idea. And I am so sorry. For everything. For Crystal. For the way I treated you. For the things I said. For all of it." She walked toward his desk, her heels making sharp, definitive clicks on the polished concrete floor. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she let his apology hang in the air, examining it like a flawed specimen. "Let me ask you a question, Jasper," she said finally, her voice calm and devoid of the anger he had expected. The lack of it was somehow more terrifying. "Are you sorry for how you treated me, or are you sorry that you so profoundly miscalculated the value of an asset?" The question landed with surgical precision, bypassing all his prepared defenses and striking right at the heart of the ugly truth. He wanted to deny it, to profess his love, but the words felt like lies on his tongue. He had been so proud of his ability to spot value where others couldn't yet. He had lived with a masterpiece and seen only a blank canvas. "I made a mistake." He stammered the words, feeling pathetic and inadequate. "A terrible one. I let this—" He gestured helplessly around his office. "All of this blind me. I took you for granted. I love you. We can fix this." "Can we?" she asked, her tone still unnervingly level. "Do you know the name of the literacy charity I've chaired for the last 3 years? Do you know my mother's maiden name? Do you know what my thesis was about in graduate school?" She paused. "Do you even know how I take my coffee?" He opened his mouth, but no answers came. The silence was his confession. His ignorance wasn't just about her family's fortune. It was about her soul. "I thought not," she said softly. Grace reached his desk and placed 2 thick cream-colored documents on the gleaming mahogany surface, side by side. "I believe you when you say you regret your mistake. You've always been a pragmatist, quick to correct a flawed strategy. Which is why I'm here. Not to fix our marriage, but to renegotiate the terms of our partnership." He stared down at the documents. The first was instantly recognizable from its formal legal font. Divorce petition. His breath hitched. The second was bound in a dark blue cover, embossed with a simple, elegant crest he had never seen before. The Devereaux Foundation. "The foundation," she explained, her voice, now taking on the crisp, clear tone of a CEO at a board meeting, was an anonymous seed-stage investor in the data compression algorithm that became the cornerstone of Drake Innovations. "My grandfather saw the potential in the technology. He also made a habit of installing fail-safes in his investments, especially when they involved young men with more ambition than experience. Our stake, held through a labyrinth of trusts and offshore entities, currently stands at 42%. As the newly appointed head of the Foundation's Technology Acquisitions and Oversight Committee, I am your new majority partner." Jasper collapsed into his leather chair. The air punched from his lungs. The foundation of his life, the core belief that he was a self-made man, crumbled into dust. He had never been the lone wolf, the visionary disruptor. He had been a well-managed investment, a prize stallion running in a paddock someone else had built for him. You're taking my company," he whispered the words, tasting of bile. "No," she said, and her correction was the cruelest, most brilliant part of her strategy. "Don't be ridiculous. You are an exceptional CEO, Jasper. Your drive and your vision are what grew this company into a global force. The company needs you at its helm. I am not removing you. I am simply taking my seat at the table, the one my family has been holding for me all along." She wasn't executing him. She was leashing him. She was leaving him the illusion of power, the title, the office, the public adoration, while seizing the real thing, ultimate control. He would still be king, but she would be the god he answered to. "The divorce will be quiet," she continued, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the first document. "The settlement is, as you'll see, exceedingly generous. Our marriage, however, is over. Respect isn't a commodity that can be bought back once it has been squandered. It has to be earned. And my respect is no longer included in this partnership. She turned and walked towards the door, her mission accomplished. "Grace, wait," he called out, his voice broken a desperate plea from the ruins of his world. "Why, after all this? Why?" She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, and looked back at him over her shoulder. The mask of the executive slipped for just a fraction of a second, and he saw a glimpse of the woman he had wounded. He saw the memory of the humiliation, the sting of the laughter, the coldness in his own eyes. "You and that woman, you laughed at my clothes," she said, her voice a quiet, clear bell of truth. "You made me feel small and worthless over a piece of fabric. I went home that night and realized you had left me with a choice." She took a breath, the finality of her new reality settling around her like a mantle. "I decided I'd rather own the whole company than ever again have to worry about what dress to wear to its party." The door clicked shut, leaving Jasper Drake alone in his glass tower. He was a billionaire, a titan of tech, a man who had everything he had ever chased. And he had just discovered he was a pauper, dethroned not by a competitor, but by the quiet, magnificent wife he had been too blind to see. Grace's story isn't just about a stunning dress or a dramatic revelation. It's a powerful reminder that our true value is never determined by someone else's opinion. It's about the strength that lies dormant within us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It's about reclaiming your own narrative and refusing to be a minor character in your own life. We all have moments where we feel underestimated or invisible. But as Grace showed the world, the most powerful transformation doesn't happen on the outside with couture and diamonds. It happens on the inside when you finally decide to own your worth. Have you ever had a moment where you had to prove your worth to someone who underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama, intrigue, and ultimate empowerment. Thank you for listening.